In that moment, as I hid between the old, forgotten crates, I wished to become one with them, sinking into the darkness that felt almost tangible. My back tensed instinctively in anticipation of a touch that seemed inevitable. The breathing of the monster, or so it appeared to me, disturbed the dead silence of the warehouse, weaving its foul note into it. This sensation penetrated through the skin, causing every nerve in my body to freeze in fear. Yet I understood. It was merely the play of my overactive imagination, spurred by fear. I had to find the strength to run, but the path to salvation remained hidden from me. The thought that a thin steel door could shield me from the creature's inevitable wrath seemed ludicrous. Nonetheless, I prayed without much hope that it would hold. How did it come to this? The thought flashed through my mind as I tried to calm my wildly beating heart. It all started 2 months ago. My name is Eric. I'm a guard, and my workplace is a typical prison on the state's outskirts, one among many that doesn't stand out in the endless list of similar institutions. My job is seldom anything exciting or unusual. Most of the time, I'm occupied with maintaining order and security, ensuring that all inmates are where they're supposed to be, according to the list on the board. This place, where I spend 8 hours of my life every day, boasts no architectural diversity or uniqueness in design. It's a collection of gray concrete blocks, topped with barbed wire that gleams in the sun like a sinister reminder of the freedom so unattainable for those confined within. Inside, narrow corridors echo footsteps, creating the illusion of presence where there is none. Cells, row upon row, serve as temporary homes for those who, for one reason or another, have lost their right to freedom. Choosing my profession was not a matter of chance. It was a kind of challenge to myself, a way to test my principles and beliefs under conditions far less comfortable than the cozy corner of my home. I aimed to understand if it was possible to maintain humanity when faced with its absence, and perhaps help someone along this difficult path toward self-discovery and redemption. My days in prison were monotonous, each new day mirroring the last. The morning roll call, the daytime rounds, lights out, all of it merged into the rhythm of my life, rarely disrupted by anything out of the ordinary. Yet, even in such routine, I found satisfaction, believing that my daily efforts, though small, could lead to significant changes in the lives of those surrounded by the prison walls. This continued until the day everything changed, the day that brought new challenges into my life and the life of the prison. The rain started before dawn, promising to make this day one of those that leave a mark on the soul, a somber reminder of the endless succession of monotonous days. Raindrops pattered on the roof of my old Ford as I approached the prison, mirroring my thoughts about the upcoming shift. The sky was heavy and overcast, casting a shadow over everything, including my mood. The parking lot in front of the prison was nearly empty. I got out of the car, took my umbrella, and headed towards the entrance, casually noting how the rain made the world around seem different, darker, yet somehow cleaner. My shoes slipped on the wet asphalt, distinctly reminding me of the morning's dampness. Passing through the security checkpoint, I greeted Jim, the entrance guard, who, as always, seemed unflappable even in such weather. "Another day, Eric," he called out to me as I walked past. In the locker room, I changed into my uniform and headed to my post. The day promised to be as unremarkable as usual, if not for one, but today, a new doctor was expected to arrive at the prison, as announced at the morning meeting. A young woman, Dr. Lilia Strong, the head of security announced, and I nodded indifferently, not expecting this to alter the monotony of my days in any way. After the meeting, I went on my usual rounds. The rain continued to drum on the corridor roof, creating a strange sense of isolation from the outside world. At that moment, it seemed to me that the prison was more than just a workplace. It was a separate world with its own rules, life, and even weather. The incident occurred closer to noon. 2 inmates got into a scuffle during lunch break. A quarrel over food quickly escalated into a fight. Myself and a couple of other guards were on the scene in an instant, trying to separate the fighters. One of the inmates received a minor wound from a makeshift knife. The situation was under control, but required medical intervention. That's when I saw her for the first time, Dr. Lilia Strong. She entered the room with a confidence and calmness that were immediately noticeable. Her gaze was focused and professional as she examined the wound. Our eyes met for a moment, and I noticed how quickly her eyes assessed the situation. She was indeed attractive, but at that moment, it was the last thing on my mind. After addressing the injury, Dr. Strong briefly spoke with the guards, giving necessary recommendations, and just as quickly as she appeared, vanished, leaving behind a sense of novelty in the usual rhythm of prison life. The rest of the day passed with the usual cares and routines, but thoughts of the new doctor occasionally surfaced in my mind. In the evening, as I sat in my car to return home, the rain had already stopped, leaving the world around refreshed and somehow clearer. 2 days after Dr. Lilia Strong joined our team, a new batch of inmates arrived at the prison. The weather, as if sensing the tension of the moment, started to deteriorate again despite the brief clearing. Strong winds drove clouds before them, heralding another storm. The procedure for receiving new inmates was strictly regulated. Upon their arrival, the first step was registration, which included collecting personal information, photographing, and fingerprinting. Then, the inmates were led to a medical examination conducted by Dr. Strong, among others. After that, they were issued prison uniforms and assigned a cell. For both the inmates and the prison staff, the day of new arrivals was always tense. The guards remained vigilant, ready for any surprises, as some of the newcomers tried to establish their own rules or even engage in conflicts with other inmates. Among the newcomers, there was one who particularly caught my attention. He was a middle-aged man with dark hair and a piercing gaze, seeming too composed for someone who had just found themselves behind bars. His name was Daniel Graves. According to the documents, he had been convicted for a series of brutal assaults, though he himself insisted on his innocence. His sentence was substantial, indicating that he was likely to spend the majority of his remaining life within the prison walls. The adaptation process for new inmates always varied. Some quickly found common ground with their cellmates, while others became outcasts or targets for aggression. The rules of conduct in prison were strict, though unwritten. Keeping calm, showing no weakness, avoiding conflicts with the guards and other inmates were among the primary ones. On this day, as the wind scattered the clouds, creating an illusion of chaos outside the prison walls, inside, a different order reigned. Inmates, already accustomed to their routine, watched the newcomers with interest, assessing them just as they were assessed in turn. Daniel Graves, however, seemed to show little interest in anything. It was as if he was immersed in his own thoughts, inaccessible to those around him. Like all new inmates, Daniel and the others went through all the standard procedures before being assigned to their cells. Ahead of them lay the first difficult days of adaptation, during which they had to find their place in the complex hierarchy of prison life. With the arrival of the new inmates, the atmosphere in the prison became even more tense. The weather continued to deteriorate, as if reflecting the general mood. Strong gusts of wind knocked against the windows and doors, creating the impression that nature itself was trying to penetrate inside and reveal all the secrets hidden behind these walls. One of my duties as a guard was to study the files of the newly arrived inmates. Reading through their files, I stumbled upon several shocking stories. Rick Johnson's story, in particular, stood out. He had been convicted of murdering his family, his wife, and 2 children. The court found him guilty of eliminating everyone who stood in the way of his happiness with his lover, Emily Watson. Other inmates also had interesting pasts. Michael Turner was convicted for a series of armed bank robberies, in which he acted with extraordinary cold-bloodedness and calculation. Thomas Riddle was convicted for large-scale fraud, victimizing hundreds of elderly people across the country. Alex Carter, a young man, landed behind bars for hacking government servers, causing serious disruptions in the operation of several state institutions. But it was Daniel Graves's case that raised the most questions for me. The deeper I delved into his story, the more contradictions and puzzling aspects I found. As I mentioned, he was officially convicted for a series of brutal assaults, but there were too many blank spots in the case. Some witness testimonies seemed fabricated, and the evidence appeared stretched. It seemed someone was very interested in seeing Daniel behind bars. After the arrival of the new inmates, the routine order of the prison was disrupted. Conflicts became more frequent, not only among the inmates but also between some of them and the guards. The newcomers were trying to find their place in the prison hierarchy, which inevitably led to friction. Contrary to my expectations, Daniel Graves kept to himself and did not engage in open conflicts, though his presence caused tension among the other inmates. I began to notice a change in the inmates' behavior. If previously most of them tried to blend in and keep as quiet as possible, now there was an air of aggression and anticipation of something inevitable. Even the atmosphere in the prison became more tense, as if everyone was waiting for the spark that could explode this powder keg. In recent days, as the storm hit our area with renewed force, strange things began to happen in the prison. The gloomy weather seemed to contribute to the increasing sense of unease enveloping the institution's walls. Nights became restless, and not just because of the thunder's roar and the wind's whistle outside the windows. The inmates were the first to speak of unusual sounds. They claimed to hear rustling, scraping, and even soft whispers echoing through the corridors deep at night. Some even insisted they saw shadows flitting past their cell doors when there should have been no one in the corridors. The situation escalated when the surveillance system started malfunctioning. Some cameras were knocked out by the storm, but others stopped working without any apparent reason. In a prison where every corner is supposed to be under constant watch, this became a real emergency. The prison warden ordered an increase in security and more night patrols, but this only added fuel to the fire of rumors among the inmates. One morning when I arrived at work, I was greeted with the news that several inmates had refused to go out for the morning walk. For prison life, this was unprecedented. Normally, any chance to spend time in the fresh air was seen by the inmates as a gift. However, now they preferred the relative safety of their cells over facing the unknown lurking outside. Questioning one of the inmates, who was usually more inclined to communicate, I tried to find out what exactly was causing such fear among them. "There's something out there," he told me, looking through the cell bars with evident anxiety in his eyes. "At night, it's not just sounds. Someone or something is walking the corridors. We see shadows that don't look human. They disappear as soon as you try to focus on them." His words made me think. On one hand, it could seem that the tense atmosphere and isolation from the outside world were leading to a collective psychosis among the inmates. On the other, too much in their words sounded convincing. I myself began to notice that night shifts had become somehow different, filled with the sensation of the presence of something inexplicable. Life in the prison went on, but now every rustle behind me made me look back. We, the guards, tried to keep the situation under control, not succumbing to the panic that was beginning to envelop the inmates. Let me explain to you in more detail. The night shift starts routinely. I check my equipment: flashlight, baton, handcuffs, radio. Before going out on a round, I make sure the connection with the central post is working flawlessly. During the night shift, there are fewer of us guards than during the day. Just 5 people for the entire complex. Each of us is responsible for our sector. And although the territory is vast, strict discipline and adherence to rules allow us to maintain order. My first task is to patrol the area. The patrol starts from the outer perimeter, slowly moving to the inner corridors. The flashlight in my hand feels heavy, its beams slicing through the darkness, revealing long rows of cells locked for the night. The rules demand attentiveness and constant vigilance. Any noise or movement must be immediately checked. This night did not promise anything out of the ordinary until I heard strange sounds behind me. Steps. No, not steps, but a light tapping of paws on the cold floor. I stopped, listening. Silence, broken only by my quickened breathing. Probably rats, I thought, but then realized by the sound that it was something bigger. Following the sound, I cautiously moved forward, my flashlight illuminating the empty corridors. Yet when I reached the place from where the sounds seemed to come, I found nothing. No trace of an animal, no signs of anyone's presence. Strange, I whispered to myself, feeling a chill run down my spine. Continuing my patrol, I was beginning to forget about the odd incident when suddenly, on the periphery of my vision, a shadow flickered. A black dog. But there are no dogs in prison, especially not large black ones. My heart skipped a beat. I directed the flashlight towards it, but there was no one there. The dog had vanished without a trace. I went to where I saw it, examining every corner, but to no avail. No trace of the animal, nor an explanation for its sudden appearance and disappearance. Returning to my duties, I tried to dismiss the uneasy thoughts. It's just fatigue, I reassured myself. However, deep inside, I knew it was something else. Something for which I could not find a logical explanation. The night slowly dragged on. I continued my rounds, every rustle making me tense. All the other security staff I crossed paths with seemed calm, but I felt fear. For the first time in years of working, I was experiencing a sense of fear. In the morning after my night shift, as the last shadows of the night melted under the rays of the rising sun, the prison greeted me with grim news. One of the guards had discovered a dead inmate in his cell, Rick Johnson, the very one who had been convicted of murdering his family. The cell was locked from the inside, with no visible signs of forced entry or struggle. Everything looked as though Rick simply lay down and died. But Dr. Lilia Strong, the prison doctor, quickly debunked this theory, stating that his neck had been broken with inhuman force. His face was frozen in an expression of terror, as if in his last moments he had encountered the embodiment of fear itself. The surveillance system, inconveniently, had malfunctioned again that night, leaving unanswered the question of what had happened in the locked cell. The prison administration immediately began an internal investigation, calling in all the security staff on duty that night for questioning, including me. I didn't see anything unusual, I repeated, though thoughts of the black dog I had seen wouldn't leave me alone. When I mentioned this, and about the inmates talking about nighttime noises and terrifying shadows in the corridors, my words were met with skepticism. The administration preferred to focus on more earthly explanations, refusing to believe in any supernatural phenomena. In the days that followed, due to the unknown nighttime noises in the corridors and the murder of one of the inmates. The situation in the prison intensified. The prison warden, sensing the growing tension among both the inmates and the staff, ordered an increase in security, adding another layer of checks and doubling the number of patrols at night. Yet even these measures could not quell the rising fear. Days passed, but no answers were found regarding the death of Rick Johnson. Each evening as I began my shift, it felt as though the prison walls were closing in tighter, and the darkness beyond them grew denser. The nighttime sounds that the inmates spoke of now seemed to me not just a figment of their imagination. They were something more, something that threatened us all. However, despite all my fears and doubts, I continued to fulfill my duties, trying to keep fear under control. I knew I had to remain vigilant. The wind howled outside the windows, thunder rumbled, and the rain poured down with such force that it seemed as though the heavens had opened all their gates directly above our prison. The storm that erupted over the world beyond these walls seemed eager to contribute to the already tense atmosphere. Despite the doubled attention to security measures, tranquility proved fragile. A conflict erupted among the inmates, like a lightning strike provoking an explosion of emotions and aggression. Two major prison gangs had snapped. The aftermath of this outburst was swift and brutal, with numerous injured chaos that we, the guards, had to suppress by force. After order was restored and we began to deal with the aftermath of the clash, an incident in the infirmary made me reconsider the boundaries of human nature anew. An inmate, whose past was shadowed by violence even before he arrived here, suddenly attacked Dr. Strong. I was nearby and without a second thought rushed to help. We managed to stop him before any irreparable harm was done. Watching Dr. Strong's reaction after the incident, I saw not fear but anger and disappointment in her eyes. It was more than just a response to the attack. It was the anger of someone who had come face to face with the darkness in another's soul. The inmate responsible for this incident was known for his propensity for violence, rumored to stem from his past as a fighter. In prison, he had been involved in multiple conflicts, affirming his reputation. He was hated but also feared. He was strong. Few could handle him. But what happened 2 days after the incident left us all in shock. Found dead in his cell, he was killed with such brutality that even the most hardened security staff could not hide their horror. He was torn in half. Part of his body lay on the floor of his cell, part hung from the ceiling. His death called into question everything we knew about security and control within these walls. The investigation into this case brought no answers, only deepening the questions that now hung in the air like a dense fog. Every day, starting my shift, I wondered, what would happen today? Who would be the next victim? Who was this mysterious killer? And why was he doing this? With each day passing within the walls of this prison, the air became more saturated with tension, as if the building itself was absorbing the anxiety and fear emanating from its inhabitants. It was like electricity, slowly accumulating before a storm, creating the sensation that a discharge could strike at any moment. We, the guards, felt this change too. Conversations at the water cooler or during breaks were no longer filled with jokes or tales of domestic concerns. They had shifted to short, tense discussions about recent incidents and rumors of an unknown threat. This sense of the unknown made us constantly look over our shoulder, even when we were sure we were safe. My own anxiety intensified with each passing day. During my rounds, I began to notice subtle changes in the behavior of the inmates. Some who were previously prone to aggression now seemed subdued, avoiding eye contact. Others, usually quiet, suddenly started showing signs of nervousness and restlessness. Their usual apathy towards the surrounding world was replaced with something else. In their eyes, there was not only the tiredness from the monotonous days spent in confinement, but also an anxious anticipation. Conversations that used to fill the dining halls and recreation areas had quieted, as if everyone was afraid to draw attention from an invisible enemy. All the guards felt the looming threat, but no one wanted to appear weak by admitting their fear. At morning meetings, our glances met, full of questions no one could answer. With each day, it became harder to maintain an appearance of control and order when anxiety was growing inside each of us. The day I was scheduled to be on duty with Tom started off as usual, but an inner premonition already warned me of the impending trouble. Meeting Tom solidified all my doubts about him into a clear picture. His reputation was known to everyone in the prison. Cruelty towards inmates, disrespect towards colleagues, and worse, his recent actions towards Dr. Strong. All of this together painted a picture of a man you'd want to stay away from. Tom was the type of guard who found pleasure in demonstrating his power over those he deemed deserving of punishment. His methods were crude and thoughtless, often crossing the boundaries of what was permissible. Rumors of his mistreatment of inmates circulated throughout the prison, but his actions against Dr. Strong drew particular attention. His harassment and indecent comments towards the young doctor were outright disgusting, and although Dr. Strong maintained her composure, her looks sometimes betrayed her inner tension. Preparing for duty with Tom was conducted in a tense atmosphere. I tried to focus on checking the equipment and planning the rounds, but his constant taunts and harsh comments about the inmates tested my patience. His crude laughter and disregard for safety rules only intensified my displeasure. I felt every joke he made, every disdainful glance towards the inmates or colleagues, made me despise him more and more. All this time spent in his company was a test, not only of my professional endurance but also of my personal beliefs. Observing his behavior, I questioned how such a person could end up among the guards. His actions and words, devoid of any respect for others, undermined the foundations of our work. Night fell, shrouding the prison in a deep darkness that seemed even denser and more impenetrable due to the clouds hiding the stars and moon. Tom, leading our security team during the night shift, took it upon himself to assign duties. However, his idea of leadership was limited to giving orders, shifting most of the work onto us, while he preferred to rest in the break room after several sharp and inappropriate comments towards other guards. His behavior filled me with deep disgust, but duty compelled me to focus on the night ahead. Through corridors lit only by sparse lamps, casting long shadows on the walls, I began my rounds. The echo of my steps filled the silence, lending each sound a special significance. In this setting, every rustle seemed like a sound of alarm, causing my imagination to paint the darkest pictures. As I passed by one of the sections closed for repairs, a shadow that resembled the silhouette of a large dog suddenly slipped out from the darkness. This sight was so unexpected in the prison corridor that I froze for a moment, trying to understand if my eyes were deceiving me. But instinct took over, and I gave chase, determined to once and for all ascertain the nature of this shadow. Racing through the corridors, I felt adrenaline fill my veins. This pursuit gave me strength and courage, allowing me to momentarily forget about the oppressive atmosphere of the prison. However, when I reached the place where I believed the shadow had headed, there was no one there. Only empty, silent corridors, where my breathing seemed too loud. As I tried to gather my thoughts and make sense of what had happened, my gaze fell on a figure at the end of the corridor. It was Dr. Strong, who apparently was not here by her own will. Her explanation that she had gotten lost seemed odd to me, given her usual knowledge of the prison corridors, but I did not delve into the details. Escorting her to the infirmary, I noticed her grateful look, which, at that moment, seemed to me the only bright spot in the night. Returning to my duties after this encounter left me with a renewed sense of vigilance. Although I had not found the source of that shadow, the chase for it and the unexpected meeting with Dr. Strong added a particular shade of mystery to the night. At dawn, as the first rays of the sun barely pierced through the heavy clouds, the prison seemed to pause in anticipation of another routine day. However, this day began with a new tragic event. Tom was found dead. His body was discovered in one of the abandoned parts of the building, far from the main corridors and cells. The death of a guard within the prison walls is a tragedy in itself, but the circumstances of his demise turned this event into a true nightmare. Tom's body was not just dead. It was mutilated with such brutality that it was hard to imagine. Several blows, apparently inflicted by a blunt object, had turned his face into an unrecognizable mass. Marks on his neck suggested that Tom had been strangled before his death. This act of violence shocked with its inhumanity. The prison administration's response was immediate and decisive. Understanding that the death of a guard undermines the foundations of security and order within the institution, additional security measures were implemented, far stricter than ever before. All staff and inmates underwent a re-screening. Every corner of the prison was searched for weapons or other prohibited items. Surveillance camera footage was thoroughly reviewed, though it provided no clues as to who might be behind this murder. Night patrols were strengthened, and the number of guards on shift was increased. A double-check system was introduced for access to abandoned or rarely used parts of the building where Tom's body was found. Additional surveillance cameras were also installed at critical points to leave no blind spots. Every staff member underwent additional safety training, including how to act in extreme situations. The administration imposed strict restrictions on the movement of both staff and inmates around the prison premises at night. The investigation into Tom's death continued, but each new day only deepened the feeling of helplessness and fear. Since Tom was found dead, the atmosphere in the prison had only worsened. The bad weather that had been raging outside for several days seemed to underscore the gloomy mood, enveloping the building in a heavy gray shroud. Rain pounded on the roof tirelessly, wind howled in the corridors, and storms lit up the sky with bright flashes, adding a sense of apocalypse to everything happening. I even considered taking some time off, trying to convince myself that a little rest would help me cope with the overwhelming feelings of fear and helplessness. However, circumstances forced me to postpone these plans. After the murder of inmates, clashes between gangs, and the death of a guard, the prison had introduced a double reinforcement of security measures, invited officers from the police department, and conducted an internal investigation. All this significantly increased the workload on the guards, including me. During these difficult days, I began to notice Dr. Strong's strange glances. It seemed she was watching me. Initially, I attributed this to fatigue and stress, but over time it became clear her presence near me was not coincidental. She appeared in the corridors as I passed by, in the dining hall during meals, and even in the yard during rounds. Her looks were inscrutable, yet I felt a hidden interest or even assessment in them. This unnerved me and caused irritation, but I tried not to let this feeling take over, reminding myself of the need to maintain professionalism. Night shifts became particularly challenging. Mysterious sounds echoing from various corners of the building were amplified by the noise of rain and wind outside the windows, creating the illusion of the presence of something or someone else, besides us and the inmates. One such night, when the thunder roared so loudly it seemed the walls might collapse from its force. I saw Dr. Strong again. She stood at the end of the corridor, her figure outlined against the flickering light, watching me. I stopped, trying to understand what she wanted, but she simply turned and walked away, leaving me in contemplation. With each day, my job was filled with new challenges, and my thoughts increasingly returned to Dr. Strong's glances and to the shadow of the dog I had seen in the corridor. Uncertainty and a lack of understanding of what was happening around became my constant companions, forcing me to seek answers to questions that perhaps would be better left unattended. The workload, the unceasing bad weather, and stress took their toll on my health. One day, returning from duty, I got thoroughly soaked in a downpour. The next morning, I woke up feeling as if I had been run over by a truck. My body ached, my head was splitting, and I had a fever. Despite this, the duties of a guard did not allow for delays, and I had to go to work. During the day, I decided to consult with Dr. Strong. With professional detachment, she examined me, prescribed painkillers and aspirin, and dryly reminded me to take better care of myself. Her advice and medications provided temporary relief, but by evening, my condition worsened. The headache became nearly unbearable, and fever made the world around me seem to drift. Despite this, a night shift lay ahead. The weather outside was raging anew, with wind howling through the corridors and rain beating against the windows, as if trying to break through. I felt terrible but tried not to show my condition, continuing to perform my duties. During the night patrol, as I had begun to acclimate to the rhythmic patter of rain on the roof, a piercing scream suddenly shattered the silence. It was so unexpected and chilling that I instantly forgot about my malaise. Rushing toward the source of the sound, I moved through the corridors faster than ever, straining every muscle to overcome the aching in my body. Approaching the place from where the scream had emanated, I discovered a bloody trail on the floor. My heart sank with horror and tension, for each of us who stays to work through such a night knows blood in the corridors of the prison never bodes well. The trail led to a cell, the door of which was ajar. The darkness of the cell seemed almost tangible as I switched on my flashlight and directed its beam inside. Despite my fears, the cell was empty. No inmate, no corpse. Only chaos from overturned furniture and scattered personal belongings. This was the cell of Daniel Graves, the inmate whose case had always seemed fabricated to me. But Graves himself was nowhere to be found. The need for action was clear, but when I tried to call for backup through the radio transmitter, it unexpectedly failed to work. I always checked my equipment before starting a shift, but this time, due to illness, my diligence was not as thorough. Disappointment and fear seized me anew. Left without communication, I decided to act independently and headed to the nearest post to report the incident. As I navigated through the stormy ambience of the prison, the relentless downpour outside mirrored the tumultuous thoughts swirling in my mind. The absence of Daniel Graves and the eerie silence that now enveloped the cell block intensified the mystery surrounding the night's events. With each step towards the post, I pondered the possible implications of the scream, the bloody trail, and the vanished inmate, realizing that the night's occurrences could unravel the fabric of security and order we had struggled to maintain. The increased burdens of work, the ceaseless adverse weather, and the escalating stress had already begun to wear on my resolve. Now, faced with a situation that defied explanation and challenged our protocols, I felt a profound sense of responsibility weighing on me. This responsibility was not just to uphold the safety within the prison walls, but also to pierce the veil of uncertainty that this night had drawn over us. As I pressed on, determined to alert my colleagues and initiate a thorough search. The storm outside seemed to crescendo, as if nature itself was responding to the chaos unfolding within. The connection between the external turmoil and our internal strife was not lost on me. Both were forces of nature, unpredictable and often uncontrollable, yet deeply intertwined in their capacity to alter the course of our lives. My thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a terrifying sound emanating from the darkness behind me. It was a growl, deep and piercing, as if the night itself had found a voice. Cold sweat covered my back as I slowly turned around, trying not to succumb to panic. Before me stood a massive creature, resembling a dog or wolf, but its size surpassed any animal I had ever seen. It was larger than a human, and in its paws, it lifelessly held the body of an inmate. I recoiled, my heart pounding in unison with my rapid breaths. My legs gave way, and I fell, stumbling over some object on the floor. The fall stunned me for a moment, but the fear of the creature standing before me compelled me to try to get up. The beast looked at me, its eyes gleaming in the darkness, and its growl filled the space, making the air vibrate. I understood that I needed to act, but my body wouldn't respond, paralyzed by fear. The thought of the futility of running flashed through my mind. I tried to gather my strength to at least attempt to defend myself, but I knew my chances were slim. The creature continued to watch me, as if contemplating its next move. Then, in desperation and hopelessness, I remembered my flashlight. Slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements, I directed its light straight at the creature, hoping to somehow blind or scare it away. For a moment, it seemed that the light caused the beast to retreat, but it was merely an illusion. The intensity of the situation heightened as the creature and I faced off in the dimly lit corridor. The tension was palpable, a silent standoff where time seemed to stretch into eternity. My mind raced for solutions, knowing full well that conventional methods were unlikely to save me from this predicament. In a last-ditch effort to protect myself, I held the flashlight like a weapon, despite understanding its ineffectiveness against such a formidable opponent. The creature's steady gaze on me was unnerving, an acknowledgement of the gravity of our encounter. As the standoff continued, the storm outside roared louder, as if echoing the intensity of our confrontation. The sound of rain and wind against the prison walls added a surreal backdrop to the scene, a reminder of the world beyond our immediate crisis. My situation seemed hopeless when suddenly the noise of footsteps echoed through the corridor. The beast instantly turned towards the sound, giving me a chance to escape. Seizing the moment, I rose and, with whatever strength I had left, darted away from that terrifying corridor. Gasping for air in desperation, each step echoed in the empty corridors. The sounds of heavy footsteps and ominous growling behind me spurred me on, despite the sharp pains in my lungs and the acute ache in my side. Only one thought spun in my head: to flee, to escape this nightmare that seemed to have chosen me as its next victim. In a state of panic, I ran into a room filled with shadows of boxes and old furniture. After a quick survey, finding no better hiding place, I squeezed into the farthest corner behind the boxes. My heart pounded wildly, each beat resonating loudly in my ears. I tried to breathe quietly, but each breath sounded like an explosion in the deadly silence. I sat there until morning, tensely listening to every rustle, expecting the creature to discover my hiding spot at any moment. Fortunately, it never did. In the morning, other guards found me. Seeing them, I felt a wave of relief, but I was far from normal. I was pale, drenched in sweat, barely able to stand. My colleagues were shocked by my appearance and how I trembled with fear and cold. As I tried to calm down, they shared news about the tragic night. An inmate had been killed, and at first I thought it was Daniel Graves, whose body I assumed I had seen in the claws of the werewolf. However, to my surprise, I was informed that it was Graves who had disappeared, and the victim was another inmate, Thomas Riddle, known for his schemes against the elderly. This revelation stunned me with surprise and further muddled the situation. Moreover, it turned out that Dr. Strong had also disappeared. The news of her disappearance added grim details to an already unclear picture of events in the prison. What is happening behind these walls? How are the disappearances of Graves and Dr. Strong connected? Later, once I had somewhat recovered, an accidentally overheard conversation among police department officers revealed that there might have been some connection between Dr. Strong and Daniel Graves. This information made me ponder. Do I really know everything about the people I work with? What other secrets lie in the shadows of these walls? This series of events, marked by fear, mystery, and the unexpected, not only tested my resilience, but also forced me to question the very fabric of our reality within the prison. The disappearances, the inexplicable encounters, and the cryptic connections between individuals I thought I knew. All these elements wove a complex tapestry of intrigue and suspense that seemed to challenge the boundaries of my understanding. As I navigated through the aftermath, grappling with the weight of these revelations, I couldn't help but feel that the truth, however elusive, held the key to unraveling the mysteries that shrouded the prison in an ever-deepening enigma.